Haz Producciones presenta Cara a Cara con Rosalía.
Bienvenidos, queridos amigos, a este programa en el que vamos a tocar un tema interesante. En estos últimos tiempos hemos tenido la suerte de que Quito fue sede del Hábitat 3, una gran reunión de Naciones Unidas que busca precisamente establecer ciertas reglas de juego, establecer recomendaciones para que los países, las personas, las poblaciones, las ciudades puedan tener un desarrollo sostenible. Dentro de este espacio tuvimos la suerte de encontrarnos con el profesor Richard Register, quien es el creador del tema de las ecociudades, de la ecoconstrucción. Y en este sentido, pues ustedes nos van a permitir que luego pasemos al inglés para hacer la entrevista al profesor Register. Dear Professor Register, we introduced it already, and I want to know something about how you start to be concerned about these eco-cities, about the environment, about climate change and all the things that comes on together to have a new approach to life.
Well, it was quite coincidental. I met an architect quite by surprise, someone who was giving me a ride across the southern part of the United States in the Southwest in Arizona.
It was how long ago?
Oh, 1965. I was 21 years old, and somebody said, do you want to visit a famous architect? My father was an architect, and it was her car, so I
Yes.
said, oh, sure, yeah, so let's meet him. So his name was Paulo Soleri, and he was planning to build whole cities in a single structure. Which I thought was a pretty unusual idea.
A single structure.
Yeah, a city that's like, like a big house, but open with lots of bridges and interior spaces, lights coming into it, like a cathedral or something, beams of light pouring into
a
it.
big structure.
But it'd be a three-dimensional structure, and it was a little puzzling, so I took the papers with me that he had written, and I studied them when I was back in Los Angeles, and I began to realize he had some really important things to say. So that's what made me first start thinking about these ideas.
Yeah, and how you get immersed after that in all what you are doing during your career. You study architecture. What do you study at university?
No, I actually built buildings with my father.
Yeah.
He would survey buildings, and he would survey whole campuses, in fact. The university.
Yeah, and you were very familiar with construction.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah, and how switch from the old way to build to the new way that you are promoting, because we are not getting there yet.
Well, that's a good question. I'm not sure how we're going to do it. I keep trying to write books, draw pictures, travel around the world, photograph ecologically healthy looking projects in cities. For example, we can have buildings with solar greenhouses that help warm the buildings in hot climates. You can have shade devices of various sorts and let the breezes blow through and cool buildings. You can attach buildings with bridges between terraces on buildings. There are many things that can happen that make the building more personable, more enjoyable, but not just the building, the public spaces like the parks and the plazas and so on. But if you think of these in three dimensions, like a human body or like any organism, and if you think of the city as like a living being, then you realize it has organs, it has things that do different things, and you want to have the various parts of the city connect with each other just by walking if possible, or by bicycle, or by transit. But if you have the car spread out by an automobile, then you have a situation where you have to buy lots of fuel. You have to pave the landscape for very large vehicles. A car weighs about 30 times as much as a human being. And so it goes 10 times as fast in normal operation. So can you really design a city for both people and automobiles at the same time? And the answer is it's very expensive in terms of pollution, energy, the land it takes, and so on. So a lot of these ideas started to make a good deal of sense to me. One of them that impressed me particularly was that Paulo Soleri would come to Los Angeles and other cities around the country, and he would say that you look out over the landscape here of towns like Los Angeles, Phoenix, Houston, and so on. You look at these environments and you see lots of small houses, little cars moving around, And it doesn't look like a lot of large infrastructure, but in fact, it's much larger than a New York City.
And it costs a lot because you have to put the services all over and on a very spread city.
You need much more in terms of pipes and wires and road surface and bridges and so on. And basically, the people don't share rooftops and ceilings and floors and walls when they live in single-family houses scattered over a large distance, whereas if you lived in apartment houses, you share. You share heating and cooling energy, you share public parks and plazas, and so on. So the idea, in other words, is that if you have a city that requires all these resources, that's a very large effect on the environment. Right now we're having the United Nations Conference on Habitat that's talking about cities. Well, how can you solve the environmental problems if your city is the largest thing we build, but it's very, very inefficient?
Yeah, we are talking also, Richard, about quality of life, because it's not only eco-friendly, it's ecological, but what about quality of life for people that spend long time on cars, driving and doing things that, and people can do other things, being with family, enjoying?
Well, I think that's equally important, if not more important, for everybody to actually enjoy their lives. But I think the contrast between, say, the European city and the American city is worth really thinking about. In the European city, you can walk in the environments much better than you can in the United States. And in most cases, there's some wonderful places developing in the United States, of course, and some historic places that are quite nice. But I think it's very possible to do both things at once. Now, you look at an environment that's dominated by automobiles, and is that really a fun environment, like crossing a really busy street? Or you sit down on the edge of a block with on a sidewalk with people going by, but it's so noisy you can't talk to other people, or it's very smoggy, there's a lot of smells from the vehicles.
Yeah, and people going for a walk to the park, and the park is completely polluted.
Yeah.
It's not nice to do that.
Well, another aspect also is that, say in the kind of work I do, we restore creeks, waterways that have been buried underground for many years, bring it back up to the surface. The plants and the animals come back. You can work with native species of various sorts, and then you have an environment that children can enjoy and learn from. Water flows through where it used to be underground in pipes. I've worked on projects like that in California, and that it makes for a much more interesting and much more educational and much more graceful way of living. And to have your children be able to take part in that as part of the quality of life that you mentioned.
Here in our NGO, FIDAL, we work a lot with educational issues, and you put a lot of effort on education. What can you say about the new education that had to be generated for young people?
Well, a lot of the new communications I think is not that helpful, like having children watch television a lot or playing video games and so on. Is okay in certain ways. It depends on what the content of the game is and what they're actually thinking.
Yeah, but most of them are very violent.
A lot are. I mean, this is sort of a different subject, but during the Vietnam War, I started something called No War Toys. Now, the idea was, are you actually training the children to think that war is fun and glorious and exciting? Little boys, not little girls. I don't get into that very much. But the whole idea that you're in a culture where people are thinking about what they're doing, well, what about the waste of time when you could be learning about nature, you could be learning how to draw and write, you could be enjoying the garden, you could be learning about other people, and you could be doing certain sports and things. But so much time is spent in doing things that aren't very creative. And I think I was lucky because my mother was very much involved in the garden, nature, walks into natural places. We had encyclopedias, magnifying glasses, and things like that. And so I became I think that's one of the reasons I became a very curious person, is because I had an environment where children really
it depends a lot on how home goes, and also school. But another things that I hear from you, because I attend some of your speeches, is talking about a quality that a lot of people lose. That quality is generosity. Can you explain a little bit your concept of generosity, how it can affect the life in cities?
Well, generosity, I would call one of the two most important things we have to do. That's what you would call mental, psychological, and spiritual, and what people are ordinarily doing in their lives, or what they do for special purposes when things are important. For example, we need to deal with climate change right now. We need to deal with the waste of energy and the displacement of natural species and so on. So I think those things are very important for us to be dealing with. And for us to be doing that with the children, I think is just vastly important.
Yeah, I'm absolutely sure about it. What kind of advices can you provide to people that is hearing us? Not only authorities or local authorities or people that had some impact on the population, but people that are watching us and says, what can we do in terms of have a better quality of life, to be aware about what's happening with climate change? Because since that time, when you start to be like shocked by the ideas of the architect, a lot of time passes through, and we are aware that things are going for worse, not for better in our world.
Well, one thing you can do is look for the things that are very positive and very possible to do, very easy to do, really. For example, switching to walking around and using bicycles more than you would otherwise.
Everybody can do that, yes.
Pretty much everybody can do it. Here in Quito, of course, it's
a little bit
it's
hard.
A little bit steep, you know, and there's a lot of hills and so on. There are things you can do like recycling and so on, but the most important thing, I think, is to actually think about these ideas, to actually study what's going on in terms of changing the city so it becomes a lot healthier. There are other issues in addition that relate to ecological city design. For example, if you have a city that's spread out across the landscape, it's important that people understand that if the city doesn't do that, then you have more agricultural land. If the city is more compact and people can walk everywhere within the city, buildings are a little bit taller than they are if they're scattered out, then you have the natural environment and the environment for agriculture very close into where people are living and working. So that becomes available for your children, for yourself, for food supply, and so on. So there are many things that fit together. Another one is the energy systems we use. You can use solar energy and wind energy, renewable energy systems. You can have more organic food. The agricultural project is gigantic on this planet. It could be much more organic. Maybe.
And most of the water on the planet is dedicated to agriculture.
I think so, right.
Yes, more than for industry, more than for other things. It's agriculture and cattle. Yeah.
In California, for example, it's about 85% of the water use.
Yes, of course.
Is for agriculture.
Yeah.
So if we're more aware of things like that, and we talk about it with our friends and our family, if we care about actually seeing that another kind of city is built, well, then you have to also think in terms of how can we change the zoning. Can we come to understand what happens politically to make that possible? When you find a particular project that you want to do, how do you actually execute it? You usually have to go before public bodies and talk about policy and so on. For example, in my experience, I've worked on bringing back pieces of creeks, waterways that are underground in pipes. And we have managed to save a few blocks to bring them back from underground by political action and telling people it's very healthy, it's great for the kids, bringing natural species back into the city and so on. And these things can actually be done and people can learn about them. I write books about these things, and so do some other people.
How people can get your books? By internet?
From the internet, Amazon and other sources. And so they can just look up my name, Richard Register.
Of course.
It's pretty easy to find my books, and under the subject of eco-cities, ECOCIT, cities. So they're available, and other people are working on it too.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Richard. It has been a pleasure to talk with you and to have you here explaining all the things and giving a speech for students in different universities.
Well,
Thanks
it's been
a lot.
fun. Thank you.
Thank you. Gracias, amigos, por estar con nosotros, y regresamos luego de unos mensajes.